Hello, I am Dreaming Fifi of RealElvish.net, and welcome to your Sindarin textbook lecture series, a companion to the textbook I wrote, which is available for free. There's a link to it in the description box. This is Chapter 1, Introduction, Lesson 1, The History of Sindarin. In this lesson, we'll cover important vocabulary, whether or not you want to study this language, its internal history, and its external history. Before we start, there's a few terms you'll need to get familiar with. The first is Sinda, with a plural Sindar. It's a Quenya term meaning gray one. It refers to the leader of the Sindar, gray cloak, also called Sindacollo in Quenya, and Thingol by the Sindar. This is not what the Sindar call themselves. They call themselves Edel, with the plural Edil. Next is Sindarin. It's an adjective and it means of the Sindar. It's also a Quenya term. When it's used as a noun, it refers to the language that Tolkien built for the Sindar. The Sindar refer to their language as Edelen. Now let's set about answering this question. Can we speak Sindarin? There's a lot of assumptions made with a statement like, I speak Sindarin, which makes it problematic. We'll break it down into these questions instead. What's this Neo-Sindarin? What do you mean by speak? What era or version or dialect of Sindarin are you referring to? Who do you speak Sindarin with, or what context will you be using Sindarin in? And what's the standard dialect of Sindarin? What is Neo-Sindarin? It's a fan-extended version of what is known about Tolkien's Sindarin. When I refer to fan extension of the language, I'm referring to the new grammatical forms and the new vocabulary that are based off of Tolkien's other and older Elven tongues. If we can't find a way to build it off of a pre-existing one, we find a different way to say what we mean. As a matter of courtesy, we always mark non-Tolkien coined words with an asterisk. The reason for this is simple. If we try to translate in Tolkien Sindarin, our translations would be far more limited. Therefore, Neo-Sindarin is what appears in The Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit movies. If someone says they can translate into Sindarin, assume that they mean Neo-Sindarin. Therefore, this course should be called Your Neo-Sindarin Textbook, but I just say Sindarin for simplicity's sake. What do we mean by speak? If you mean the ability to hold a conversation, then sorry, that's not entirely possible. Sindarin is missing gap fillers and a lot of conversational phrases, even with Neo-Sindarin extensions. If you mean the ability to make translations, then you're in luck. With the amount of Neo-Sindarin grammar and vocabulary, we can make some limited translations. If you mean the ability to write using their orthographies, then there's been a bit of a misunderstanding. That isn't any kind of speaking or translating, that's just transcribing. My course does cover Sindarin orthographies, but only as their use applies to Sindarin, not English or any other language. Which Sindarin do we speak? This question is a little bit more complex than you would first assume. Tolkien couldn't stop meddling, fixing, and changing his languages. Therefore, this textbook is about Sindarin from around the time that Tolkien was writing The Lord of the Rings up to his death. Tolkien also described a lot of dialects of Sindarin. We know of Central, Northern, Southern, and Western Beleriand, Shore, Doriath, Mirkwood, Lothlorien, Exilic Shore, Exilic Western, Exilic Northern, and Exilic Southern Beleriand, and Gondorian and Númenorian, the ones in bold I will be focusing on. Not all of the information about Sindarin has always been available. Neo-Sindarin also has eras. Therefore, the translations for the Lord of the Rings movies use different vocabulary and grammar than the Hobbit translations, due to more of Tolkien's notes on his languages being published between now and then. How will you use Sindarin? If you intend to use it for roleplay and fanfiction, then you're in luck. This course is optimized for making translations for characters because I don't prescribe a standard dialect, and I teach all of the ones that we know about side by side. If you want to make tattoos in Sindarin, we will learn how to write Sindarin in various Elven writing systems. If you want to learn how to name characters, yourself, or friends, I suggest checking out my name lists at realelvish.net. I list common name suffixes there, and that coupled with what you learn in the Prestanneth chapter and the Dialects chapter will give you a good starting point for learning how to make names. It's not a topic I cover specifically in the lessons, though. If you want a secret language for you and your lover to whisper under the sheets, check out my phrasebook section titled In the Bedroom. Couple that with learning Sindarin grammar and you'll be set. All of this leads us to this very important fact. There is no standard Sindarin. Every Sindarin scholar has their own version of the language. Therefore, people who don't translate using my theories aren't automatically wrong. Moreover, Tolkien's notes and translations are still being published. Therefore, Neo-Sindarin is always changing to accommodate the new information. Old translations aren't automatically wrong, they're just old. That's why it's important to know the date that a Neo-Sindarin translation was completed. Therefore, this course will get edited often. Now that you know whether or not you want to continue, let's move on to the history of Sindarin. With a fictional language, there are two different histories to describe. The internal history, which is the history that Tolkien imagined for the language, and the external history, which is the history of Tolkien's development of Sindarin. Let's start with the internal history of Sindarin. Sindarin first started being spoken in Middle-earth in the peninsula of Beleriand by a group of Tellarine elves that followed Elu Thingol. There were several dialects of Sindarin that developed at this time. Keep in mind, the lines I'll be drawing on this map are very vague in general. Also, I'm not terribly good at drawing to begin with, and a mouse doesn't help matters. Let's start with the northern dialect, of which we know very little, so I won't be covering it in this course. There's the western and central, including Doriath dialects, which are just about identical and arguably the ones we know the most about. And lastly, the southern dialect, which I will also cover. In the first age, both Morgoth and the Noldor came to Middle-earth. The Noldor's presence changed the Sindarin around them, bringing in many loanwords from Quenya. At this time, Melian magically closed off Doriath from the rest of Beleriand. The speech inside Doriath and the speech outside began to diverge. It should be noted that the elves of southern Beleriand were reclusive and resisted getting involved in the war for the most part. They avoided the Noldor too, especially after word got out about the kinslaying at Alqualonde. Their speech resisted Noldorin influences. During the war, many Sindar fled east, and it's a good thing they did because, Silmarillion spoiler alert, Beleriand sunk under the ocean when the Valar defeated Morgoth. This is what the western end of Middle-earth looked like during the Second Age. You can still see the blue mountains on the western edge of Middle-earth, which had been along the eastern edge of Beleriand. The Sindar that had fled brought with them their language. They joined the Lindar and the Nandor, who adopted it as the Elven common tongue. The surviving Noldor ended up living in Eriador, while the Sindar went farther east, to the Misty Mountains and beyond. Most notably, a large group who didn't like the Noldor or Galadriel ended up east of the Anduin in Mirkwood, and another group, more friendly to Galadriel because of her time in Doriath, rubbing shoulders with King Thingol, ended up in Lindorinand, which Galadriel renamed as Lothlorien. Meanwhile, the Númenóreans gained and lost their isle, Númenor, and came back to settle Middle-earth. Their upper classes were bilingual in Aduna and Sindarin. We don't know much about their usage of Sindarin before the Third Age in Gondor, so I will focus on their dialect of Sindarin around the time of the events of The Lord of the Rings. Before then, you can consider them to use whatever dialect their elven teachers use. And now the external history of Sindarin. Sindarin is vaguely based off of Welsh in grammar and phonology, but knowing Welsh won't make learning Sindarin much easier. They aren't the same language. Sindarin is not Welsh through a cipher. It's its own language. Tolkien's languages were a continual work in progress, and he was always changing his mind. The previous drafts of the language that would become Sindarin are called Gnomish and Noldorin. When Tolkien first started working on the language that would become Sindarin, it wasn't a language for the Sindar. It was for the Noldor. That's why Gnomish is derived from the Greek word for knowledge, and Noldo means wise one. The language was called Goldogorin in the language itself. It dates back to the first draft of the Silmarillion. It's described in two documents, the Gnomish grammar and the Gnomish lexicon. Now to the next stage, Noldorin. As the name suggests, it's still a language for the Noldor at this point. Noldorin is broken into roughly two eras, early Noldorin and late Noldorin. Early Noldorin we can't borrow very many words from because it's closer to Gnomish in phonology. Late Noldorin is very, very close in grammar and phonology to Sindarin. Many words can be borrowed from late Noldorin without any changes to them. The most extensive information we have on late Noldorin is in the etymologies from The Lost Road and other writings. And Noldorin finally became Sindarin, with a few tweaks. Tolkien never stopped tweaking his languages till the day he died. Tolkien decided that it was a branch off of the Telerin language family tree, and renamed it Sindarin. And he discarded the languages Doriathrin and Ilkorin. So many people were interested in the languages that he started writing an extensive appendix about all of the non-English words, phrases, and passages in The Lord of the Rings. But it was taking too long to finish. A truncated version made it into The Return of the King, and it wasn't until 2007 that this document saw the light of day. It has so much previously unknown information that its shockwaves are still felt to this day. When making a translation, don't focus on the individual words or the grammar. I know that sounds odd to say when starting out a class on a language, but let me explain. As a translator, you aren't translating words and grammar. If that's all translation was, it'd be a simple code, not an art form. No more interesting than switching out the letters of the alphabet with dancing stick figures. Translation is an art form because you're expressing ideas. The words and the grammar are your tools for expressing ideas. You won't be able to express ideas in the same ways that you do in English, and translation is really difficult, especially in a dead language. That is my final piece of advice to you as you start on this journey. Translate ideas, not phrases. And that's all. Thank you for watching, and see you at Chapter 1, Lesson 2. Novare!